careful then how you live, Paul writes to the Ephesians. For the days are evil, and when he says evil, he means that the days make it rather hard, rather tricky to live in a way that Paul would say is wise as opposed to unwise. And this phrase, be careful, we perhaps all hear, as we can recall it, first, not so much from St. Paul, but rather perhaps from the mouths of our parents. Who has heard? We have all of the children in church today. We don't have Sunday school because we're hosting this fabulous godly play training. So all of the younger people among us, and even the older ones, how many of you have heard your parents say to you, one if not more times, be careful? I've heard mine. Yes? No? Maybe? Little resonance. I see it. I see you. Yes. Over and over again. And I find myself now on the flip side of this equation because now I have a little person to parent. And people keep saying to me, there are lots of right ways to be a parent, which is good news, but sort of difficult to take in. And I am reminded, in fact, of something that happened to me when I was very young that seems to put this into stark relief, which is that it was either my 4th or 5th birthday, and I went to a Montessori school before I went to kindergarten. And my mother had made these cupcakes for my birthday, and they all looked beautiful. They were all sort of perfect. There were 2 trays of them, and my father was dropping me off that morning, and my mother said to my father, Simon, don't let her carry the cupcakes. And you can guess why maybe my mother said that to my father. Well, there was a car drive between leaving the house and getting to Montessori school, and you can bet that by the time we arrived, I had pleaded enough with my father, said, Daddy, please, it's my birthday, please let me carry the cupcakes, and my father relented and said, all right, you can carry a tray, and I'll carry a tray, and we'll go in. And I probably don't need to finish the story for you, but suffice to say, the tray my dad was carrying, that went fine. My tray, it wasn't even just a few cupcakes. It was the whole tray that was out of commission. And so everybody got half a cupcake in my class, which is wonderful and very biblical in the sense that Jesus likes to feed everybody, whether it's a whole cupcake or a half cupcake. But at the same time, I was very embarrassed, and I was very sad. And I also, I think, felt a bit guilty because I thought, well, if I hadn't been carrying this tray, we'd have all had a cupcake, and all my friends wouldn't have to know that obviously something had happened, i.e. me, in order that this should have taken place. And if I think back, was my mother right to say to my father, Simon, don't let her carry those cupcakes? Probably on some level, yes. There was some wisdom in that. And at the same time, was there wisdom in my father letting me carry a tray? Probably yes, some wisdom. And so the readings this morning that we have, they have this topic of wisdom come up in the Proverbs reading, and even in Paul's letter from the Ephesians, where Paul says, be wise, take care how you're living, that you act as wise people and not unwise people. And yet what we hear is that wisdom isn't necessarily just one specific thing. It's not all that clear. And it's not always just a matter of correcting and saying, all right, you know what, next time I won't carry the tray of cupcakes, and that's how to fix the problem. Because as we get bigger and bigger and older, it can seem like the matter of living in a way that's wise is simply a question of me, myself. If I can just get the right approach, the right strategy, if I can really think hard about what the right thing to do is, then I can take care of it. And yet, we hear even in Proverbs that this question of acting in a way that's wise, it's not very clear, It's not necessarily a matter of correction, but it's always about community. We hear wisdom, and she's crying out. She's sending out her servant girls, and she's calling from the highest points so that as many people can hear. And what does she say? She doesn't say, "You that are foolish, get it together. Fix that." Instead, she says, "You that are simple or that lack in any sense, you come right in. You come and feast at my table because I've got it all ready. I have gotten the meat ready, I've gotten the wine ready, and it's for you. And all you need to do is come and sit down and eat." And that may make us think of another place where we come together and we have some food and we have some wine and we kneel or we stand together and we eat. So this wisdom that we're called to, mysterious as it is not something we learn on our own, but something we discover. And that most importantly, we discover with one another and with God, because the next line, when Paul says, "Be careful how you live," the next thing he says is, "Don't be foolish, but understand what is the will of God." So presumably, whatever the wise way of living, the mysterious wise way of living is, it has everything to do with God's own will and God's own way for our life. And this mystery and this sense of community is enriched even more when we hear these words from the Gospel of John this morning. And they may be very familiar to us because we sang a hymn last week that has these fabulous melodies, and it says, "I am the bread of life. You who come to me will not hunger." It has this beautiful chorus we all sang. So this is a familiar reading, and yet it is so mysterious. How can it be? How can it be that Jesus' body, Jesus' own flesh, should become food for us to eat that would give us life? And that's exactly what the Jewish leaders are grappling with when they say to him, "How? How is that possible?" And Jesus doesn't actually answer their question, but he rather seems to point to why. Why is it that Jesus would give himself, that he would come down from heaven so that we might be fed and might have everlasting life? And with all that mystery still intact, and with very little clarity, Jesus seems to say to us, "There is nothing that I wouldn't give for you. There is nothing I wouldn't do. There is no part of myself that I would not offer so that you might live a life that's real and that is unending. And I would give that for you and to you, even if it means that I have to die, so that everything that I have, you might have as well." And what is such a beautiful gift waiting for us this morning is that the gospel writer reminds us that not even Jesus, when he's living on earth, not even Jesus has all the clarity and all the certainty that we feel we lack, because we're reminded of his relationship with God. We call him God the Father. And we're reminded that throughout Jesus' life, he kept talking to God. He kept asking God over and over again what he was supposed to do, where he was supposed to go, and asking God to give him the ability to do that over and over again, so that even in Gethsemane, before he goes to the cross, Jesus is saying to God his Father, If I cannot do this, please make that possible. But if there's no other way, let your will be done. And even Jesus enters into this mysterious wisdom only because he is so close to God and God is so close to him. And so, an invitation that we receive this morning, along with that invitation from wisdom who's calling out to whoever will hear her, is to think of this carefulness that Paul talks about. Not so much as the carefulness that covers our own back and makes sure that we're secure and says, I am priority number one and everybody else, I'll look out for them next. But an invitation to take care in the sense to look around, to notice the tables that God invites us to feast at, to notice when that invitation is happening, whether it's at the front of the church, whether it's at our kitchen table in the morning at breakfast or anywhere else, to see what mystery is there that God is inviting us to step into. And I find in most of my life, I usually can see these things, or at least I think I can see them better when they're quite a long time ago, when I can look back and say, God was moving there and I didn't realize it. And very rarely does it happen that God shows up in some kind of way right in front of me, and sometimes, just sometimes, I can see it when it happens. And one of those times was on Thursday, this last week. And I was doing one of my favorite things in my favorite place, which is called Cedarbrook. And it is an assisted living home, and it's about 5 minutes from here. And we have lots of members who live there, and we have people who worship there. And every Thursday morning, we have a Eucharist at Cedarbrook. And one of the priests from this church goes to serve it. And I cannot tell you why. It is very mysterious to me, but I love it. It is one of the most favorite things that I get to do in serving here. And it's gotten to the point where even my husband knows before I go to say something to me about it. And this Thursday he said, I hope that Cedarbrook is restorative and rejuvenating for you, because it is this place and this activity that when I go to do it, it doesn't matter what side of the bed I got out of or how my morning has gone, but I can feel like a different person most of the time when I leave there. And I have no idea how it happens. And so this week was yet another masterclass in how I need to be more careful, because we have a beautiful, wonderful group of people called the Altar Guild, and they set up everything so that every time we eat the body and blood of Jesus, they make that possible. Cedarbrook is a bit different because the priest has to remember to bring the things that are needed for this. And so I showed up on Thursday and there was no wine. And I knew there was no wine. I'd forgotten to bring a bottle from the church. And I thought, what are we going to do? And I went into my problem-solving space, and I thought, I went to school with Methodists. They're a different kind of, they also love Jesus. But one of the things that makes them a little special is that instead of using wine, guess what they use? They use grape juice. So I thought to myself, there must be some grape juice in this very elaborate and very well-equipped space. And I had asked somebody at the front desk about that, and they were working on it. And then this gentleman who comes fairly regularly and who is wonderful, and some of you may know him, his name is Ron West. And Ron West said, I have some in my apartment. And I thought for a second, some grape juice? And then I realized what he meant was that he had a bottle of wine that we could use. And so he went up to his apartment and he got the bottle of wine and he brought a corkscrew to open it. And you know that the Holy Spirit was in it because he handed them both to me. And somehow I did not split the cork. And we had this bottle of Heritage Red from Napa. And I'm pouring it into the chalice and I'm thinking, this is not just God coming through to clean up the mess that I made. This is not just God saying, well, ideally you'd have brought the wine, but I suppose since you didn't, we'll come up with some kind of consolation prize. But I put this meal together that was this offering from Ron and from God and through us. And I was so grateful that I hadn't remembered to bring the wine from church. And I only used a bit of it because I thought Ron would probably want the rest of his wine back. And I even finished it because I wanted to cherish so much this gift. I didn't use a whole lot, and when we had all eaten and drunk, I drank the rest of it because it seemed so precious to me that Ron had given this gift, that Ron just didn't sit there and say, well, I have a bottle of wine, but I won't say anything, and that Ron wanted to help me so that we could have this feast. And so I wonder if the wisdom and the care to which Paul calls us and to which God invites us is not so much the care to get it right the first time and the care not to make a mistake in the first place, but that we might take care to look and see where God shows up and how God does, to see the tables we're invited to take our place at, to behold what God does when we're there, and to wonder and to walk out as those who are ready to share that feast. Amen.